Man, that's a great exercise. Really tough. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name's Juan Dhas, and welcome to this week's lesson video. And today we're talking about odd time and odd meters. In the last video, I included a guest solo that I did for a friend of mine, Ilko van Zanten. Man, I'm sorry if I butchered your name. But I did a guest solo for him, and the tune was in 7, and actually he himself wanted to see a video on odd meter soloing. And while odd meter soloing is an interesting topic in and of itself, I think it speaks to a greater problem or issue or challenge that people have with odd meters themselves. Not so much whether it's the soloing or the comping, both of them kind of feed each other in the overall grand scheme of things. Now, please do bear in mind, while this is something I've been working on a lot more for the past year or two, a lot of the information here is something I still use to help keep my time and my odd meter stuff in check, and stuff I'm still working on and working to get it feeling better and more fluid, which I guess is the goal. So please do bear that in mind with a lot of these, but I hope these help you as much as they help me, and I have to give full credit to Daniele Camarda for introducing me to a lot of these concepts. So, starting with, I guess the way I'm going to do this video is as follows. I'm going to touch on a really basic idea first, for people who are just getting into odd meters for the first time, and something for the more experienced musicians who've had time to deal with this stuff. So, let's get into it. Now, talking about odd meter for the beginning. Like, odd meter is one of those things that seems to throw a lot of people off, and with good reason. It's unfamiliar territory for many people, and I guess really the first port of call is to familiarize yourself with stuff that you've already worked on, right? Stuff that you should be working on and getting to feel a little more in your system. That's kind of, I guess, what some would call the secret to playing odd meter. One comparison I like to draw is if we look at other cultures that use odd meters, so let's say some Middle Eastern cultures, or the Balkan cultures, or the Mediterranean cultures, a lot of these meters don't feel so foreign. Why? Because their entire, for example, dances or points of cultural significance attached to these. For example, I was talking to a friend of mine from Serbia a few years ago, and he was mentioning that, yeah, a lot of these things in 7 or insert whatever time signature are dances in the Balkan culture. And that makes so much sense, and it's something to think about as we get further in this, and that the end goal is that you shouldn't really be counting at the end of the day. So, for the people who are just entering into odd meters, I would recommend familiarizing yourself with claves. What's very common for people to begin with is, at least if you come from a rock background like me, when it comes to odd meter or even some basic stuff, it's very common to count out everything. So everything sounds very linear, and that's a very specific sound in and of itself and yields interesting results. But when it comes to playing and grooving an odd meter, one of the things we have to get away from is counting. And to draw another cultural parallel, if we think of Latin music or Afro-Cuban music, we think of claves. So for example, much like someone will hear that as a 2-3 clave, and vice versa, you have the 3-2, and whether it's a rumba or a son clave, these are indications of the time. Now, because musicians who've grown up in these cultures have these ingrained in, quite literally, their musical DNA, they might be playing in the style, but they're not counting everything out. Sure, they're not ignorant, they are aware of where beats are, but they're feeling the pulse or feeling the meter as opposed to counting everything out. So one port of call, if you're first starting out with this stuff, is get yourself familiar with claves. So for example, in the intro I was playing in 7. And specifically in my head, or rather corporeally speaking, I'm thinking to some degree or another of 2, 2, and 3. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, right? Or I'm thinking of a greater pattern of just 4 and 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you can familiarize yourself with that, then playing through an odd meter starts to become less of a hurdle and less of a challenge, and actually becomes a little more enjoyable because you're latching onto something that's a little more musically inclined, and it's easier to take that into account as you're playing and easier to keep track of. Bear in mind, if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 all the time, you're going to get lost at some point or another. And when I'm on the bandstand, I want to be thinking as little as possible. So I like to be aware of what's going on around me, and I can check in with that every now and then. Now, for people who are a little more advanced, what I just said offers a little bit of a clue as to how I approach odd meters, or how I'm starting to approach odd meters. Rather than being beholden to a clave for the whole time, I like to check in with it every now and then. So one marker I've seen of great improvisers and great musicians who make odd meter music feel really comfortable is that they aren't beholden to the clave itself. They can branch out if they need to, they can explore different feels of the clave, and they can maybe move away from it for a little bit, play a little freer, because they know where it is and they can return to it at some point or another in their solo or in the overall musical piece. So I want to talk about 2 exercises that you guys can use, and we're going to start with the first one. So because you have a recording of that, so to speak, as a reference, you can check that out just by rewinding the video to the beginning. But essentially what I was doing, I had my metronome set really slow. I actually had it set to 34 here. And it's good to do this with slower tempos because you can really start feeling the greater space of things. And I have this set to 1 beat in the measure. In this case, I was playing around on beat 1 just to not give myself a hard time. But I encourage you to explore other beats in the measure. And that's something I'm starting to experiment with, like putting the beat on beat 2 or beat 3. And what I'm doing is I'm subdividing it in such a way that I'm feeling a bar of 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. That's essentially what the metronome is doing. And if you're just starting out with this stuff, what I encourage you to do, just take one of the claves and just play it on loop until you feel comfortable. So for example, if I get my metronome going, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? I'm just sticking to the meter. And I'm exploring 4 and 3. Try lock in as best as you can. And bear in mind I'm talking at the same time, so that's... my time's going sideways while I'm talking at the same time. Then what you can do is try break down the clave even more. So try 2, 2, 3 for example. If If you want, try comp through a tune, you know. I don't think I have to explain what this tune is. And eventually what you can do is, you see, as you saw me do there, I started moving away from the clave and just exploring comping freely in a bar of 7, but checking in with the clave every now and then, maybe not always hitting beat 1. Now bear in mind, what you can do is you can start moving the claves about. So for example, I could play 3-2-2. I could also try 3-4. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? I could also try maybe 2-3-2. 1, 2, 3. That one's a tough one because it flips your expectations. So another exercise you can do to help your odd meter, and this actually helps your time in general as well, is a little rhythmic thing I picked up from Daniele Camarda, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And this, yeah, I give full credit to him. He really helped change my playing in many ways. And this explores the simple concept, well, simple in terms of what it is, difficult in terms of application and actually trying to get your head around it at first. But please don't be intimidated by it. And it's the simple idea of polymeter, where you have essentially 2 time signatures going at the same time, or 2 groupings. So let's put it simply. We're going to do a group of 7 in the right hand. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And bear in mind, we're doing everything on a 16th note grid. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1. And that's an example of the exercise I'm talking about. You see in my hands, I'm marking groups of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Over the top, with my voice, I'm marking groups of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. And I'm specifically accenting beat 1 of 4, or rather the clave, 4 and 3, right? What I was marking before in my right hand. So essentially you're going to have 2 patterns running at the same time. Now, so effectively you can do this a number of ways. You can do this with the metronome acting as the groups of 4. You can also do this with your hands marking 4 and you singing the syllables, or you can do this with just your hands. I encourage trying all of them. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1. Sorry for the glitch in my left hand. Now it's harder when you do it slower, and I encourage starting with 4 and 3 first because it gives you a very large feel of the measure, as opposed to something very micro and something very contained and very microscopic, for lack of a better word. So faster tempos, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1. Actually, I would encourage, this is one thing I would encourage people to explore the Indian syllables, the conical syllables, as they offer a little, I've noticed when I've started learning this, I wouldn't say I'm particularly experienced with it yet. I'm still very much getting a feel for it all. It's easier to keep track of things, and the pattern becomes almost cyclical and meditative in a way. So it's kind of cool. Takadimi takita, takadimi takita, takadimi takita, takadimi takita. And there's more of an attack to each beat, and it's just easier to integrate and easier to keep track of once you learn what the syllables are. So I'm using takadimi for 4 and takita for 3, just to be extra clear. Now what you can also do is take that 16th grid, takadimi, 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 but accent every 3 notes. Takadimi, 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 and so on and so forth. Now what we're going to do, and this is where it gets a little weird, is we're going to put 7 on top of 3. That makes sense, right? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, takadimi, takita, ta. This is initially going to be a little odd at first. So what I would recommend is go really slow and map out what we would call the junction points, or where, let's say, the beat or the accent of the clave meets one of the beats in the right, or in the other hand, or in the other part of your body that you're using, or the metronome. And try this with a metronome at first, just to keep yourself accountable. Because what happens is, if you try do this on your own, you might end up compensating for yourself at some point, which is kind of what we want to avoid in this instance. So eventually you can try back-to-back exercises. Do 4 for 1 or 2 measures, and then do it against 3 for 1 or 2 measures. This sounds complicated at first, but once you get a feel for it, it really becomes very natural. Then what you can do to explore it further is try experiment with different claves, much like what I was mentioning before with the metronome exercise. So for example, I could do 2, 2, 3 in my right hand, and I'm going to do 4 in my left. Takadimi, takita, 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 ta. And you'll see that everything kind of goes a little sideways for a minute, and then it joins again. If you're doing this correctly, with groups of 4, I believe in conical they look at it kind of the opposite way. Personally, I think it's easier for me to keep track of the claves as opposed to how many patterns of 4 I'm doing. So if you do this correctly, let's say we're in a measure of 7, or we're not a measure, let's say we're using groups of 7. If done correctly, I should repeat the clave of 7 4 times before the entire pattern cycles again. The other way of looking at it, which I believe is the more traditional route, is it's 7 cycles of 4. Just to repeat. Either way of looking at it, it should take 4 cycles of 7 for me to circle back around to the beginning of the pattern. 1. Or the beginning of the cycle again. Or you can look at it as 4 cycles of 7. Whichever works best for you. Personally, I think it's easier for me to keep track of the claves. Again, I'm trying to make sense of this in my own personal way, at least. Now, why am I mentioning this? How does this pertain to playing in odd meters? What I find is sometimes the issue, and I definitely see it in maybe how I would play before, is that when odd meters are comfortable but not yet quite integrated, sometimes we can really stick to the clave, and we're kind of stuck with it and kind of chained to it, and we're afraid to venture out. This allows us to tap into different feels. We can either feel the 4 or the 3, but it also integrates our awareness of the clave, because suddenly through these exercises you're going to find they're difficult at first, and even I've been doing them a little while, and every so often I still find myself glitching out on 1 or 2 patterns, especially 2-3-2. That one's a little bizarre because I'm still not used to how 2-3-2 feels. So what this ends up doing is this gives you a better awareness of the measure and different possibilities within the meter. And let's say if the piece or the musical context you're playing in has a specific clave involved, let's say the whole piece is 2-2-3, or a significant chunk of it is 2-2-3 or 3-2-2 or whatever combination. If you've practiced it enough, that meter should start to feel comfortable. And then we see a phenomenon that's very similar to what I was mentioning with the rumba or the son claves. The clave becomes second nature and you just start to feel. And even though, let's say you're playing in a band, someone else or maybe all of you have a reference point for the clave, it's not being overly stated all the time. And you have the freedom to move away from it and come back around to it. And if you tried starting with 4-3 or 3-4, you have a larger view of the meter and a more refined and tightly polished view of the meter if you're thinking of further subdivisions. So, I know this lesson was a little bit mathematical in some ways and more applied to just rhythm, but I suggest really starting this with your hands, your voice, maybe tapping your foot along to a metronome to keep yourself in check so that you really get this incorporated and kind of integrated into your body, and then start applying it to the instrument, and then start taking it to other patterns and explore other possibilities. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. If you do enjoy the video, please do like and subscribe. It really helps the channel a ton, and I will see you in the next video.